In Hollywood at that time, Scientology was just simply a no-go. The lawyers would just say no. And whether they said, look, you're right, this should be completely up for parody, we don't want to risk it, and we don't want to go to court, and they sue everybody.
Our #1 story in the countdown tonight, Cruise, Scientology, and South Park.
We were told that the people involved in Mission Impossible 3 demanded that show be pulled off the air, and it was.
One of the touchiest episodes was about Scientology, a notoriously litigious group.
Isaac Hayes recently quit his job as the voice of the character Chef.
Goodbye.
But half the battle was just getting it out. Once it had gone on the air, you couldn't put it back.
Hayes said he left because of, quote, inappropriate ridicule of religious community. So, Scientology, you may have won this battle, but the million-year war for Earth has just begun.
Alright class, I hope you enjoyed that little intro I made. As you can see, today we're talking about one of South Park's most controversial episodes. Now, if you've attended any of my lectures in the past, you're probably well aware of the fact that South Park is pretty controversial. In fact, you probably have at least some knowledge on the controversy we'll be talking about today, considering its large section in my most popular lecture and the large-scale news coverage it received at the time. But even if you watched that lecture, you probably don't know the details of the situation, and through my research, I discovered that this rabbit hole goes so much deeper than I ever thought possible. Today, we're talking about that time that South Park took on one of the scariest looming threats in all of Hollywood, an organization that struck fear into the hearts of anyone who considered speaking out against them, considered for many years to be completely off limits to criticism. We're talking about Scientology. Well, you see, all of that scary and threatening stuff I just said used to be true. That is until South Park made this episode and proved that they were significantly more bark than bite. In fact, it's very likely that this single episode of South Park not only exposed the true nature of Scientology to the general public for the very first time, but started a chain reaction of events that caused such immense, irreversible damage to the group that their continuing descent into obscurity can be directly traced back to the release of this episode. To put it simply, this cartoon directly led to the downfall of the world's most successful cult. It also might have caused some more minor effects outside of Scientology. For example, it led to threats of legal action from one of the most famous people in the world. It nearly canceled the media tour for Mission Impossible 3. It led to an incredibly invasive private investigation that included attempted espionage. It caused one of the main voice actors from the show to quit after 10 years, and it might have even been the inciting incident that would lead to that same actor's untimely death just a few years later. You know, just minor stuff. Now, that might sound like a lot, but I promise you all will be explained in time. And trust me, we haven't even scratched the surface yet. Because this is that time South Park took down an entire religion. You know what else Tom Cruise is often associated with? Fighter jets. And you know who else loves fighter jets? Everyone, so that's why you should go and check out today's sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. You can take command of over 2,500 different vehicles, including tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships. War Thunder also has one of the most sophisticated vehicle damage models in all of gaming. Every vehicle is intricately modeled down to its individual components, like engines, fuel tanks, weapons, and crew, all susceptible to damage or disabling from enemy fire. The game also offers an insanely comprehensive customization system with countless different camos, historical markings, decorations, and all types of stuff for all different types of vehicles. Thanks to all these small little details, it is incredibly easy to become immersed in the intense combat of War Thunder. My favorite part of War Thunder is just how intense the combat gets. When you're fully immersed in this game, it really is a feeling that's hard to find in many other games. And the best part is, this game is totally free. You can play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. Just use my link in the video description or pinned comment to sign up. And if you're a new player or you haven't played in over 6 months, you get a massive bonus pack that includes multiple premium vehicles and an exclusive vehicle decorator, 100,000 silver lions, and 7 days of premium account. And this is only for a limited time, so that's why you need to go click the link in the description or pinned comment and come join a worldwide community of over 70 million players by downloading War Thunder. And thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Now, I'm going to assume that you all know what Scientology is by now, but I think it's important to give some general information about the religion, and I use that word very lightly, as well as get an idea of what the general public's knowledge of Scientology was like before the release of this episode. In short, they didn't know much. In 2005, Scientology had already been around for decades, with many sources claiming the church reached its peak anywhere from the late 70s to the early 90s. In terms of how many Scientologists there were at their peak, it's pretty ambiguous, with some people claiming they never broke 30,000 and others claiming upwards of 700,000. As you'll see, the church tends to be pretty unreliable when releasing any information about themselves, so it seems like the true scale of Scientology will never really be known. At this time in the mid-2000s, the general public had heard of Scientology. Like I said, it had been around for decades, and over that time it had picked up some rather well-known people, such as Tom Cruise, who had become a public advocate for the group as early as the 1990s and quickly became the face of the church. This meant that knowledge of Scientology was very surface level in the mainstream. People had heard of it, but no one really knew anything about it, as the church liked to keep a rather low profile. So, when the face of Scientology went on Oprah in May of 2005 acting like he had been hitting the slopes in the green room, people started to wonder just what the hell did Scientology do to this man?
I'm not gonna pretend.
I can see you're not. You know, Katie once told 17 magazine, yes!
Though he didn't directly speak on Scientology in the interview, he would later make some statements that directly echo the beliefs of Scientology, going after Brooke Shields for her antidepressant use. You see, Scientology doesn't really like the idea of psychiatry. In fact, Dianetics, which is one of the core principles of Scientology, was created as essentially a replacement for psychiatric care. A month later, in an interview with Matt Lauer, Cruise would expand on these views, calling psychiatry a pseudoscience and condemning any use of psychiatric drugs. Interestingly enough, he actually made some points about the overprescription of these medications that are reasonable and make sense. The problem was his insistence that there are absolutely no cases where they should be used, and his refusal to accept psychiatry as a legitimate medical practice. Also, the fact that as the interview went on, it seems like he's getting increasingly angrier, starkly contrasting the lighthearted, joking attitude he shared literally moments ago, to the point where he's essentially yelling at Matt Lauer.
And you should do that also, because just knowing people who are on Ritalin isn't enough. You should be a little bit more responsible in knowing
I'm not prescribing Ritalin, Tom.
So for the first time, the general public gets a small glimpse into the beliefs of this group, and their first impression is that Scientology, despite the name, seemed to be rather far removed from any form of science. And the main spokesperson for the group seems like he himself might benefit from some psychiatric care based on how incredibly unstable he was in his last two interviews. So now all the general public knows about Scientology is that they don't believe in psychiatry and their main spokesman might be clinically insane. And with that, the two creators of an adult animated TV show decided it was time to do some digging. And what they found would shock them so much that they knew they had to share it with the public, and this would be the beginning of the end.
Stan, do you want to hear the great secret doctrine of life behind Scientology?
Sure.
All right, go ahead and tell him.
On November 16, 2005, episode 12 of the 9th season of South Park would air on Comedy Central, simply titled Trapped in the Closet. The episode opens with the boys looking for something fun to do on a Saturday, with Stan insisting that they do something that's free since he's saving up for a new bike. Cartman, being annoyed by this, reminds Stan of the first law of physics.
Anything that's fun costs at least $8.
The rest of the boys then go to play laser tag. Side note, you know you're broke when even Kenny can afford to do something that you can't. So while Stan is out looking for some fun free activities, he just so happens to pass by some friendly folks offering free personality tests and talking about something called Scientology. Apparently, it's a cool new thing, as celebrities like Tom Cruise and John Travolta are Scientologists themselves. Stan begins to notice that all of this is very religion-like, so he asks about it, and their response isn't very reassuring.
Then how come that sign says Church of Scientology?
Oh, that's just his thing. What's the Denver Broncos record now, 6-2?
One of the Scientologists then begins asking Stan some questions, and by the time he's done, he comes to the conclusion that Stan is horribly miserable and depressed. In his mind, there is only one solution to this.
What do I do?
It's very simple. We just need $240.
Stan then heads home to discuss his depression with his parents, asking them to pay for the $200.
Stanley, I didn't know you were miserable.
Neither did I!
They say that if he really wants it, he should spend the money he's been saving for his bike. And even though he's a bit more hesitant, he decides that it's worth it.
Yeah, well, just like the rest of us, you have to make choices with your money. You want a bike, or do you want to not be depressed?
Upon paying the fee, they begin to explain the history of Scientology to Stan. The founder and prophet goes by the name of L. Ron Hubbard. Now, L. Ron has his own extensive history that the episode doesn't dive into in detail. However, they do mention the fact that he was a science fiction writer. During his life, he built up a rather large resume as a serial scammer and is known for some absolutely incredible quotes, such as, "You don't get rich writing science fiction. If you want to get rich, you start a religion." Bit on the nose there, L. Ron. They continue to explain that he discovered that the body has thetans that cause negative emotions, which can be read by a device called an e-meter. Now, at this point, you may notice that it seems like they really did a lot of research into how Scientology recruits people, and according to ex-Scientologists, their portrayal is very accurate.
So these are actual questions on Scientology's personality test.
We just need $240.
I mean, that's exactly how that goes. The standard response to every item on the test evaluation, they go, Scientology can help you with that. And then they sell you an introductory course.
Well, there's a reason for that. First of all, I want to give a huge shout out to Andrew Gold. Funnily enough, he's the same guy who interviewed Jesse Morton, the man who made the threats towards South Park after episode 200. Made a whole video about that if you want to check it out. But Andrew also interviewed Mark Headley, an ex-Scientologist who now advocates against Scientology. This interview provided me with tons of information about how exactly South Park impacted Scientology, and I highly recommend you go listen to it if you have the time, as I will be referencing it throughout this video. In this interview, Mark mentions that one of the reasons South Park was so knowledgeable on Scientology is because they consulted with a man named Mark Ebner, a journalist who had been researching Scientology for decades, going as far as to go undercover as a potential recruit for Scientology. He's essentially an expert in Scientology, and Matt and Trey worked directly with him while making this episode. So while Stan gets his thetan levels read, they quickly realize that Stan is a very special boy.
There was only one person who ever registered OT9 in the history of our church. Our prophet has returned.
Word spreads fast, and before he knows it, Stan's house is swarmed by Scientologists hoping to get a look at the reincarnation of their prophet. One of the more excited followers even found their way into Stan's room. Of course, it's Tom Cruise, who seeks approval in his acting abilities from Stan. Stan's answer isn't exactly what Tom was looking for, and he heads to the only place he knows.
Well, I mean, you're not like as good as Leonardo DiCaprio, but you're okay, I guess. You're not Gene Hackman or that guy that played Napoleon Dynamite, but you're okay.
Ah!
Hey! Dad! Tom Cruise won't come out of the closet!
Try as they might, they cannot manage to get Tom Cruise to leave the closet, even when R. Kelly shows up to give his 2 cents.
Well, I was just standing here, and Tom Cruise locked himself in the closet, so I pull out my gun!
The current leader of Scientology decides that Stan needs to know all of the secrets of Scientology, so he sits him down to explain the actual beliefs of Scientologists. I'm not going to explain the whole clip, I'll link it in the description if you want to watch it, but the story is incredibly fantastical. It includes tales of Lord Xenu, aliens, intergalactic airplanes, soul catchers, brainwashing, and alien souls possessing mankind. Completely unrelated, but remember how they mentioned L. Ron Hubbard was a science fiction writer? Anyways. Throughout the entire 2-minute scene, a text box appears at the bottom of the screen reading, "This is what Scientologists actually believe," in all caps. And as it turns out, yeah, this is what Scientologists actually believe. But actually, the vast majority of Scientologists don't know this story, as it's kept very secret. Now you may be thinking, why would a religion that's trying to convert people want to keep their beliefs secret? Isn't that kind of like the opposite of what you would want to do? And that's correct. In fact, if I didn't know any better, I might say that this behavior seems to be more in line with what a cult would do. But as we'll talk about in a little bit, there's a good reason why they don't want this information out there. So after Stan is educated on the full truth of Scientology, he's asked to continue where he left off and add to the sacred doctrine. Meanwhile, Tom Cruise is still in the closet, refusing to leave. In fact, he's denying that he's even in the closet to begin with.
It's time for you to come out of the closet.
I'm not in the closet.
So while Stan is writing his new sacred doctrine, the rest of the boys tell him that they're concerned about his involvement in this cult, to which Stan denies that it even is a cult and claims that he's found meaning in it.
I didn't know you were depressed. Neither did I. But now, if you guys can't accept this great thing I belong to, then I suppose we're no longer friends.
Back with Tom Cruise, he is still in the closet, so they try to use fellow Scientologist John Travolta to get him out. This, of course, just leads to John Travolta going into the closet as well, now also refusing to come out. And of course, R. Kelly just gets angrier.
And I pull out my gun! Oh, Jesus, here we go with the gun again.
When Stan shares his new writings with the leader of Scientology, he's very excited about them, until Stan reveals the most dramatic change that he's added.
And best of all, I wrote that all the Scientologists should no longer have to pay money to belong.
What?
He then goes on to reveal his true intentions with Scientology.
You don't actually believe this crap, do you? Those people out there buy that crap, but I thought you were smart enough to see what was really going on. What's better than telling people a stupid story and having them believe you? Having them pay you for it, stupid! That's how a scam works. But this is a scam on a global scale.
Stan is rather caught off guard at first, but when he starts talking about making millions of dollars, he remembers how he needs a new bike, and he's a lot more receptive to it.
Yeah, I get you.
Then keep writing, Elron. Your people are waiting.
Meanwhile, Tom Cruise and John Travolta are still in the closet, and they still refuse to come out, even after R. Kelly is sent up there to get them out. R. Kelly then gets curious, and who would have thought, he ends up in the closet as well.
Now I'm in the closet. Now I'm in the closet too.
In the morning, Stan is ready to share his new doctrine with the world. He begins to read, but as he looks out across the sea of people and recognizes just how much this means to so many of them, he knows that he can't do it. He decides that it's best for these people to know the real truth.
We're all looking for answers, you know? Sometimes we want to know the answers so badly that we believe just about anything. I'm not the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard, and Scientology is just a big fat global scam.
This does not go over very well, and all of the Scientologists begin to threaten to sue Stan. This includes Tom Cruise, who finally made it out of the closet, as Stan adamantly defends himself against the threats. This is referencing the fact that Scientology has a very long history of taking legal action against those who have come out against them, starting lawsuits in several different countries over the course of many, many years. The episode comes to an end with Stan making a final proclamation against the group, and it's pretty clearly meant to be the creators themselves speaking directly to Scientology.
Okay, good! Do it! I'm not scared of you! Sue me!
And as the credits roll, they play into the joke even further by refusing to show any of the actual names of the staff who worked on the episode. Instead, they replace every name with Jane or John Smith. And that's where the episode ends. It's one of my favorites. It has hilarious moments and some scathing commentary, but all around it's a pretty typical episode of South Park. And I gotta say, I'm absolutely certain that all parties being referenced acted completely reasonably after this episode. I really doubt that there was any sort of extreme backlash. Yeah, we probably should have seen this coming, especially since this is the second time I made that joke. As you might imagine, Scientology wasn't exactly happy about their portrayal in this episode. I didn't really get into it in the intro, but I mentioned that before this, Scientology was seen as off-limits in the media. People were scared to talk about them at all. The reason for that is that they have a long history of doing things that are best described as batshit crazy. They're kind of known for going to the most extreme lengths if it ensured that they would get their way, especially if it meant protecting their image. For example, in the podcast, Mark mentions that the group perpetrated the largest infiltration of the US government in history, as thousands of Scientologists were hired into positions in various government organizations and offices in an effort to dispose of unfavorable records about Scientology. Yes, that is real, you can Google it. It's called Operation Snow White. So if they were willing to go that far with the US government, you would assume they definitely weren't about to sit by and watch as a cartoon expose their best kept secret to the entire world. So they started digging. You see, Scientologist has a branch known as the Office of Special Affairs, or the OSA, whose job it is to essentially investigate and harass anyone that they deem to be enemies of Scientology. Not only that, according to Mark, they have people whose full-time job it is to scrub through every video about Scientology that exists on the internet and transcribe and summarize them.
And they're printing out and making copies of and transcribing every single video that gets done about Scientology on the internet. Everything.
Which means they are definitely doing that to this video right now. So, hello Scientologists watching this. Hope you're doing good. I'm sure that's a very tiring job. So, best of luck to you. So in 2011, former Scientologist Mark Rathburn, who is the third Mark connected to Scientology that we've talked about in this video, uploaded some documents to his blog about Scientology's look into South Park. These documents detailed how the OSA had been in the process of conducting a full-blown investigation into Trey Parker and Matt Stone, discussing potential, quote, direct lines to Matt and Trey through connections such as friends. Quote, one is Matthew Prager, who has been a friend since 1991. Another is John Stamos, who is best friends with Matt Stone. Apparently, his ex-wife, Rebecca Roman, is also good friends with Stone. These documents also detail what they call special collections, or the methods they would use to gather information on Matt and Trey. This included things like going through their trash, purchasing their phone records, hacking airline reservations, and purchasing bank records. According to Mark Headley, they would also do things like get information on the companies catering to South Park Studios, just in case they eventually wanted to get someone to work for those companies to get inside the offices, and they would also do things like write down every license plate in the parking lot and run them to identify the owners of every car. They even went as far as to attempt to hire a film student to act as a spy and get a job at South Park Studios. I'm just going to go ahead and read the whole document for this one because it's short and it is unbelievably funny. A PI met with a young filmmaker who recently graduated college, who was a student of Eric Sherman. The filmmaker recently did an interview with Lloyd Kaufman, a friend of Trey Parker and Matt Stone. He has agreed to assist to establish some comm lines in the South Park studios and to try and get intelligence on their plans with regard to Scientology. He is going to approach Kaufman to see if Kaufman can get him an introduction to Parker and Stone and either possibly get a job as an intern there or as a writer. Parentheses, he has seen every episode of South Park. Like, if that's all it takes, Scientology, hook me up, dude. Like, I think I even have a better resume than that guy. So Scientology quite literally did everything that they could in a massive, coordinated effort to dig up something negative about Matt or Trey that they could hurt them with. So, what did this meticulous and exhaustive investigation reveal about Matt Stone, Trey Parker, and anyone else at South Park Studios? Absolutely nothing. Scientology has never released a single piece of information that was negative or embarrassing about any employees at South Park Studios. So unless this investigation was even more extensive than we thought and it's still going on nearly 20 years later, it's safe to assume that they just didn't find anything of interest. But why were they so mad in the first place? Why is it so important to keep their belief secret? And why would they go to such extreme lengths to get revenge on two dudes who made a cartoon about them? Well, there's a few reasons for that. Firstly, because their religion commands them to. You see, our old friend Elron created a policy for Scientology long ago that he dubbed Fair Game Law, which identified that, quote, any action taken against a suppressive person or group is, quote, fair game. That pretty much means if someone is talking bad about Scientology, it's your job to make sure that they stop. I don't care how you do it, make sure they stop. And despite the fact that Scientologists claim this practice was discontinued decades ago, their actions speak a lot louder than their words. So that explains a lot of their history of aggressively trying to silence their opposition with lawsuits and threats. For example, Mark mentions a case where they tried to sue a whistleblower of the church but ended up having to pay her millions of dollars. As he said, their strategy is always to either threaten you or to bribe you. And let me be clear in saying that Scientology, I'm sure you're not too happy about this video being up and reminding everyone of all the bad stuff you do, but I do have some great news for you. My journalistic integrity can be bought for a lot less than $1 million. I mean, you could just slide me $50K and this video will cease to exist, no questions asked. I'm just saying. But that still doesn't explain why they insisted that their beliefs remain a secret. You know, the whole Lord Xenu and alien souls watching movies or whatever. Why does it matter that South Park talked about all of that? Well, you see, South Park talking about these confidential beliefs was the single action that would seal Scientology's fate for good. Allow me to explain. As I mentioned earlier, the general public knew very little about Scientology at the time, just like the Scientologists wanted. All the alien stuff had been leaked onto the internet at this point, but only the most niche corners of the internet were aware, and Scientology had done a really good job of silencing anyone who dared to share this information through essentially abusing copyright laws. So basically, no one knew about any of this at the time, and it had received no widespread media coverage. At the same time, 90% of Scientologists knew very little about Scientology. The stuff about Lord Xenu and alien souls, only a tiny number of Scientologists actually knew about any of that stuff. Mark Headley says that he was at the international headquarters of Scientology for 15 years, and he never learned about any of that stuff. He first learned all of that stuff from the South Park episode, and he didn't even believe it at first. He had to confirm it with his wife, who was previously a higher-ranking official in Scientology, and she told him that, yeah, that's exactly what they believe. And the reason that no Scientologists know about this stuff is because in order to learn about it, you have to make it to operating Thetan level 3. OT levels in Scientology function essentially as a video game ranking system that determines how enlightened you are. But unfortunately, you can't climb this ranked ladder by grinding out MMR over time. This game is pay to win, because the only way you're moving up the ladder is with money. And while OT3 may not seem very high, Mark estimates that by the time a Scientologist has reached OT level 3, they have spent upwards of $200,000 on Scientology. Now you may be starting to see why Scientology was pretty upset about this. For the first time ever, the true beliefs of Scientology were shared with the entire world. Even Jenna Miscavige, the niece of David Miscavige, who's the dude who's been the leader of Scientology since the 80s, has talked about how she learned about the Xenu stuff from South Park.
But it did get out. I mean, it eventually...
It did, from South Park.
From South Park.
Yeah, that's where I learned about it.
Wow.
Wow.
This story that was previously only accessible behind a $200,000 paywall was now completely free public information that everyone knew about. As you would imagine, this would essentially destroy Scientology's entire business model, since they profited off of people who were seeking the truth.
What's better than telling people a stupid story and having them believe you? Having them pay you for it, stupid!
Combine that with the fact that the story itself sounds like, well, a poorly written science fiction novel, and you can pretty much guarantee that anyone that hears about this will never be joining your religion. However, the release of the episode didn't immediately cripple Scientology. You see, they had their own unique form of contingency. According to Mark, in the church, Scientologists were taught that you could not hear anything about higher OT levels until you made it to those levels yourself. If you did happen to learn about levels that you haven't reached yet, you would get pneumonia and die. So, luckily for Scientology, if any of their members saw any of the stuff in this episode, if they didn't die of pneumonia the next day, then it couldn't be true. Because of this, a lot of the members at the time just thought that it wasn't what Scientologists actually believe. And because the vast majority of these people would never reach OT level 3, it didn't even matter, since they'd never really even know. So while in the short term, it wasn't a massive blow to Scientology, the real way that South Park took down Scientology was by opening the door for others. After South Park ruthlessly went after Scientology and came out completely unscathed, everyone else saw that and thought, huh, I guess Scientology isn't all that scary. There's nothing they can really do. And from that moment on, Scientology was the laughingstock of religions. No one is afraid to make fun of them anymore, now that they realize that the worst they can do is send some vaguely threatening letters and dig through your trash. Now everyone knows about Scientology's weird beliefs, about Lord Xenu and his army of alien ghosts, and we can all point and laugh at them because of how stupid that is. Most importantly, no one who knows anything about them will join their scam ever again. They have to rely solely on people who live under a rock, because the vast majority of the public knows what Scientology is really about. And despite the church's claims of continued growth, some estimates place the total number of Scientologists at less than 10,000 in 2023. A far cry from their numbers long ago. And all of this is the case because South Park wasn't afraid to go after the boogeyman nearly 20 years ago. Even their biggest spokesperson, our boy Tom Cruise, seems to be moving away from the church as rumors spread about him distancing himself. You know, speaking of Tom Cruise, did he ever make it out of that closet? I totally forgot to check up on him.
Go away!
No, it doesn't seem like he came out of the closet yet, but it does seem like he threatened to sue South Park. Reports say that Tom wasn't too happy about his portrayal in this episode, with Matt and Trey wanting to joke about the rumors that Tom Cruise might be secretly gay. When they discussed this idea with their lawyers, they pointed out that Cruise has a history of suing people who had spoken about his sexuality. So, because this is South Park, Their loophole was to place Mr. Cruise in an actual closet. Sources close to Tom Cruise claim that he was not happy about this, which is completely shocking because he seemed so convincing when he said this.
I have never worried, Matt, about what other people think and what other people say.
There were rumors that Cruise still threatened to sue South Park, but these were never confirmed. However, it seemed like Tom might be the one to get the last laugh, because only a few months later came the legendary Closet Gate. You see, they had planned to rebroadcast the episode on Comedy Central in March, but suddenly, and without any explanation, the episode was canceled and replaced with another. Immediately, speculation about Tom Cruise's involvement in the pulling of the episode was seen all over, with anonymous sources claiming that Tom himself had the episode pulled. The narrative was that during his Mission Impossible 3 publicity tour, Cruise had caught wind of the rebroadcast, and he told Paramount, the studio behind Mission Impossible, that he would boycott his own publicity tour if the episode was aired on Comedy Central. Comedy Central was also owned by Paramount, so it made sense that Cruise could do something like this. 2 days later, Matt and Trey would release their own official statements on the matter, which went exactly as you would expect it to.
So, Scientology, you may have won this battle, but the million-year war for Earth has just begun. You have obstructed us for now, but your feeble bid to save humanity will fail.
Fans of the show were not very happy about the situation, as they rushed to spread pirated copies of the episode online to ensure that it wasn't censored. The full episode was even uploaded on YouTube, where it would amass over 700,000 views. When asked about this, Comedy Central even said that they didn't even ask to have it removed, pretty much confirming that they didn't seem to mind this kind of piracy. A couple months later, Matt and Trey even hosted a public screening of the episode in a London theater, handing out free copies of the episode to attendees afterwards. They wanted as many people as possible to see this episode, and more importantly, they didn't want to be defeated by Tom Cruise. It would be months before the episode would be rebroadcasted, but eventually in June of 2006, it was broadcasted for the first time since the initial airing. Now, during all of this, Tom Cruise remained adamant that he had absolutely nothing to do with the pulling of the episode. He would discuss it in an interview on ABC, and even though I couldn't find the video of it, I'm gonna read the quote here, and you can tell me whether you believe it or not. First of all, could you ever imagine sitting down with anyone? I would never sit down with someone and question them on their beliefs. Here's the thing, I'm really not even going to dignify this. I honestly didn't even really know about it. I'm working, making my movie, I've got my family, I'm busy. I don't spend my days going, what are people saying about me? Yeah, whatever you say, Tom. But that pretty much rounds out the Tom Cruise era of South Park controversy, leaving us with only one more thing to talk about. Following the airing of this episode, Isaac Hayes, the voice actor for Chef, would quit from the show. Hayes was a Scientologist, and shortly after, he published a statement berating the show for being intolerant and bigoted towards religious beliefs. Matt Stone would release his own statement clapping back at Hayes, calling out the hypocrisy in profiting off of making fun of every other religion, but not being able to take it when it's his turn. The very first episode of the following season saw a plot in which Chef would be brainwashed by a cult, leaving all of his friends in South Park behind. Despite their best attempts, the boys are unable to rescue him from the cult, where he suffers an absolutely horrific death. This would be the last of Chef that we would see in South Park. Then, 2 years after his departure from the show, Hayes would pass away from a stroke at the age of 65. The circumstances surrounding his death were rather odd, but we'll come back to that in a second. Years later, Isaac Hayes' son would come out and state that his father had suffered from a stroke in January of 2006, which left him unable to speak or comprehend much of anything. During this time, everyone around him was involved in Scientology, so while suffering from obvious brain damage, Scientology quit on his behalf. And as it turns out, Hayes' son wasn't the first to make this accusation, as journalist Roger Friedman, who was a close friend of Hayes, wrote an article the day after Hayes' death that essentially makes the same claims, as well as some shocking ones that I had somehow never heard of until I started researching for this video. He describes an interaction with Matt Stone shortly after the release of the episode, in which he details Hayes coming to him in tears, stating that he was under pressure from Scientology and that he would be forced to quit if they didn't stop making fun of it. A week later, he was performing Chef songs at a ball, indicating that his relationship with South Park was as strong as ever. But after his stroke, He had been severely mentally and physically impaired, barely recognizing Roger at one of his disastrous shows. And then, just a couple years later, came his untimely death. On August 10th, 2008, Isaac Hayes was found unresponsive in his home on the ground next to a running treadmill. The cause of death for Hayes was determined to be another stroke, however, an autopsy was never done. This left a lot more questions than answers. Why would someone who's recovering from a stroke be on a treadmill alone in their house? Why didn't they do an autopsy? The potential answers all seem to point exactly where we expect them to. As Roger Friedman mentions in his article, and as we talked about earlier, Scientology is very much against any kind of psychiatric care or psychotropic drugs, which just so happen to be precisely the kind of drugs that would be routine in helping someone recover from a stroke. Scientologists also believe in a very specific detox treatment that is used to clear any of these potentially dangerous drugs out of your system. This treatment is known as purification rundown, and it consists of spending hours a day in a sauna alongside consistent exercise and a diet that consists of a bunch of different vitamins, including over 300 times the recommended dose of niacin. So, running back through all this information, we know that Isaac Hayes was recovering from a stroke, likely taking some form of psychotropic meds as part of his treatment. We know that everyone that was consistently present in his life at this time was a Scientologist. We know that Scientology hates psychotropic medication and avoids them at all costs. We know their treatment to flush these terrible drugs out of your system involves lots of time spent in a sauna and exercise. And we know that Isaac Hayes was found dead next to a running treadmill. Now, some may look at this information and put pieces of this puzzle together and say things like, Scientology killed Isaac Hayes, or they're monsters who tarnished his legacy and took advantage of him at his lowest moment because they couldn't stand the fact that he was friends with the people who had criticized them, or even, they did all of this while actively forcing him to take part in a dangerous pseudoscience treatment that would eventually be the cause of his untimely death. You know, I personally wouldn't make any accusations like that, but some might. You know, despite all the darkness we've talked about today, I think we can all rest assured that the only trajectory for Scientology from here is down. And if it weren't for South Park back in 2005, that might not be the case. So now, hopefully you all have a better understanding of that time that South Park took down an entire religion. Oh yeah, and don't forget to check out our wonderful sponsor, War Thunder. You can check them out on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox. Use my link in the pinned comment or the video description to register. Remember, if you're new or you haven't played in 6 months, you'll get that massive bonus pack that includes premium vehicles and a bunch of other cool stuff, so go click my link in the description and get started now.